Alright, so much things has been happening and still figuring out along the way, but I'd probably just want this Cinderella video out of the way. As you guys have been seeing, Cinderella has been riddled with different issues since her release, but I think there are many things that I feel like we should end up being consistent with her right now. I highly doubt that she would get a drastically different kit after all this time and that she would be functionally different. But if there's any different thing about her build or anything with their fixes, then I will make a follow-up video. So I just want to point out as a big disclaimer, the current build she has in this video may not necessarily be the most optimal, however it's in with good faith at what I think is she'd be best suited with and how I would currently approach building her in my different accounts including my free-to-play account. First, let's talk about her performance. Regardless if she'll get nerfed or not, I think her performance is on par with other top DPS. Even if we do get the potential 20% DPS loss from what I assumed in my other video, if they do fix that bug, she's still going to be a top contender for DPS. On top of that, she's definitely the best electric DPS right now by far. But let's not get dragged on too much on what ifs right now and let's talk about building her. I'm sure a lot of you had already want to use her properly, so let's get right into it. In terms of skill building, her core skill is skill 1. To give you an idea, when I was skill leveling up her skill 1, skill 2, and burst to level 7, she gained the following damage increase. At skill 1, she gained about 20 to 30% DPS increase from level 1 to level 7. Skill 2 gained about 1 to 5% DPS increase and burst gained about 10 to 15% DPS increase. So with this, we could build her accordingly where there's a huge emphasis on skill 1. I would start with the budget build being 10-4-7 and then gradually increasing to 10-7-10, and then when you feel like having some more resources, then push her to 10-10-10, as it is still ideally to build her maxed out because she's still a great DPS and you would like to invest a lot in her. Moving on to Overload, she's still very standard DPS unit. Elemental damage prioritization is still the most important stat, especially for DPS. This allows them to be relevant even in the long term, even if they get power crept, since you can still end up using them for elemental specific raids. The other lines I'm aiming for is at least 1, but ideally 2 or 3 max ammo lines and 4 times attack lines. The more ammo lines and the less time she reloads, the better. This is due to her wind up time after reloading, which requires her to charge up first before attacking continuously. Unlike most DPS, Cinderella suffers if she reloads often because of that. Attack is still important because her skill 1 and her burst skill are based off her final attack. Attack is not fully diluted as well in her kit, unlike say 2B, because Cinderella only has 2.71% scaling from her HP while 2B has 6.16% attack scaling from HP. This means that attack buffs aren't as useless on Cinderella than it was on 2B. After that, the last 1 to 2 lines on her will be up to you. Due to how expensive rock rerolling is, I would personally just be fine with getting crit rate, crit damage, or charge damage as well, but I would also just be fine not rerolling anything else. And if you end up getting max ammo line, that's likely fine as well. I would also just refer to this rough calculation on the damage by overload stat here that Ultras from our community has provided. This calculation is not counting on the bug right now, and it's just a rough estimation as a disclaimer. However, as you can see here, attack is a very highly valuable stat, and then followed by crit rate and crit damage afterwards, and then charge damage lastly. This graph does have a lot of assumptions, so take it with a little bit of grain of salt, but this is just to give a rough estimate. On top of just overload lines, I'd like to make an additional note that upgrading your gears to max out as well, including the boots to +5, is actually good for Cinderella as well. Due to her HP scaling on her skill, then you do want to upgrade these boots as well, as opposed to the other DPS where we typically just don't upgrade the boots at all. In terms of cubes, she's leaning more towards Bastion, but Vigor is also a good option as well. There were times when Vigor did seem to be performing better than Bastion for me, but this will ultimately depend on the team composition and also possibly on the content you're using her. I would just experiment on both cubes to see which performs the best on your overload build or the team you're using. I could see Bastion performing as well, for example, if you have less ammo lines, and I could see Vigor performing as well if you don't have her with any HP buffer. buffers. Additionally, there might be other circumstances. So for example, if you're like me who did upgrade the resilience cube to level 15 over Bastion and my Bastion is just currently level 10, then that might be something to consider as well, because for example, at higher levels of cube, you do get higher elemental damage, and as you can see here at level 15, I do have up to 19% elemental bonus damage. Meanwhile, at level 10, you only get about 12% elemental damage. If depending on the element that you are fighting, that might be a consideration of whether you want to use your Vigor cube or your Bastion cube or Resilience cube. In terms of Doll, she does come up as highly recommended, being a good DPS. If her damage potential stays the same and doesn't get nerfed, I would rate her alongside with the other highest priority DPS alongside Scarlet Black Shadow, Alice, and Red Hood. In terms of unit synergy and team compositions, she does come really flexible to build around. Not having attack damage self-buff in her kit allows her to have great synergy with one of the strongest buffers currently in the game, which is Crown. This means that we can build her along in a Crown-oriented team. Building Crown is as simple as having any burst 1 cooldown reduction, 2 DPS, and a flex support or additional DPS. Burst 1 can be either Litter or Rouge. A low investment Rouge may perform worse than Litter. At the moment though, it may be difficult to slot in another unit that would synergize with Rouge a lot, that can also deal high potential damage scaling off HP. And no, not talking about 2B. So if it's a single team content, we'll likely see more use of Litter because we're likely using another DPS alongside that's not scaling off HP. For example, potentially Scarlet Black Shadow or Red Hood or even Ein depending on the element of the content. If we do end up using Scarlet Black Shadow, we could potentially take advantage of having Alice as just a flex buffer and also burst generator, and maybe worthy considering if the boss doesn't have any core. If the boss does have core, we could use Naga as well as a flex buffer position, as she provides both core damage bonus and she can also heal Crown, which gives better uptime on her attack damage buff. Aside from Crown though, like I mentioned, Cinderella is flexible to a lot of different teams. If we do revolve her around Rouge, we can go put in Blank if we need some heals, or put in Grave if we want to go more offensive. Despite Grave being more oriented to Pierce themes and is suggested to be used for Pierce, technically Grave's buff is more valuable than Blanc. Grave has a 48% attack damage buff, meanwhile Blanc has 39% damage taken increase. While they're both different multipliers, if we do have no additional other source of either multipliers, they would end up being mathematically functionally similar and Grave would end up being better. In a similar vein as Grave, Mari is also another option for her 40.99% attack damage buff alongside with some attack buff. Tia Naga is also a solid team as Tia provides some attack damage and Naga provides some attack and core bonus. If you don't have Rouge, Noir is also a combination with Blanc still. And if we absolutely have none of the B2 option from just recently mentioned, we can use Summer Rosanna, Ram, or Novel as runner-up options, but I wouldn't intentionally upgrade these units at this point now because there are more other better burst 2 options for Cinderella, but as temporary filler at level 4s on skills until you get the other units, that would be okay. As a side note, in terms of mass, depending on the team composition, there is a chance that her combination with Cinderella doesn't work well due to Cinderella's low attack scaling. Mass buff only works with the 2 highest attack units, and if your Cinderella is massively uninvested compared to your other units, even to some other supports, she won't get mass buff HP. And if you use Rouge, you can somewhat potentially have mass buff after Rouge ramps up her HP buff. However, that is stacking 2 HP buffers in the same team and you would have diminishing returns when you run both of them in the same team. In terms of Axia, with Treasure, while Axia does provide good damage taken increased debuff, part of her issue stems from needing another unit for cooldown reduction. So with this, Axia could work, but it depends on what's the trade-off in the team. One main reason I could see it is a decision if you don't have Rouge and is using Litter somewhere else in a solo raid situation. Overall, it's a situation per situation basis, and the chance that we won't use Axia with Cinderella is relatively high, but not exactly fully zero depending on the account and whatever units you have or the boss that we are facing against. And finally, in the burst 3 or flex category, Cinderella is flexible on who her best buddy is right now. In solo raid, depending if it's neutral or electric advantage where you want to split off your element advantage into different teams, we may end up adjusting things. For neutral situation, we could end up having her in Ein or Summer Anise team for good electric oriented team, and if she ended up with the Grave Pierce team, she could end up being with Red Hood. In a fire advantage solo raid, I could see Rouge with 2B and Blanc alongside with Cinderella. Winter Ludmilla is another that works as both either main burst 3 DPS or just as a flex debuffer. With Ludmilla's damage taken increase, Cinderella working alongside with Grave or Crown's attack damage buff would have great synergy for that buff variety. Noir and Summer Anise also work as a buffer or alternative B3 filler depending on what units you have left, as well as depending on what element the raid is. Noir does have ammo replenish, which is crucial for Cinderella, and also with her being an attacker, even though she only has 14% caster's attack as buff, it does end up being slightly more valuable than what it seems due to the discrepancy of attacker's type attack stat versus as a defender type. And I'll be honest here, I think these are just scratching the surface on where Cinderella could end up being in terms of teams. There's plenty more combinations where she can end up with, and especially depending on the boss, it can also vary. I'll probably have a separate video talking more about these later down the road. So be sure to check that you're subscribed already in the channel so you won't miss out on these future videos. In any case, Cinderella is a strong unit and is definitely built as a DPS in mind. She has been set as a defender so that her kit with HP scaling would work well. I would highly recommend getting at least a copy for her for any person. In terms of duplicates, as usual, that's for competitive players. Assuming her current damage potential is kept, then competitive rankers could use having dupes of her. But yeah, that's about it for now. What are your guys' thoughts on Cinderella? Are you getting duplicates of her or just getting one copy? And how did your pulls go? As usual for everyone, thanks all for watching. In case you guys didn't know, I actually do go often live on Twitch at twitch.tv/KaiJLV, and I do go live on Twitch more often than on YouTube. YouTube's live streams are a bit more event based. We do account reviews, Nikkei, any other gachas, talk about that. We do have a pretty big community of just people that enjoy any gachas. If you guys play any other gachas, be sure to just come hang out also. We have a Discord also set up and people hang around there talking about the different things. But yeah, that's about it for now, and I'll see you guys later. By the way, did you know that 56% of you still hasn't subscribed yet? Make sure to click that subscribe button, click that bell notification, leave a comment, like, and subscribe.